The rules of the game have changed. 2024 and 2025 were particularly tough years for deliverability, and therefore for cold emailing in general. This is due to players like Google, Yahoo, and more recently Microsoft, who have tightened their anti-spam rules, especially regarding cold email. Before 2024, everyone had the playbook. It was simple and predictable. Recently, things have become a bit more complicated again in terms of technicality. But don't worry, I'm going to explain what has changed why, and what the new playbook is that you need to follow. Before getting to the heart of the matter, let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Antoine Thoreau, and I am the co-founder of the Sendao agency and the business-to-business ninja training programs. I've been a cold outreach expert for almost 10 years now. I now use AI in particular to improve the performance of this channel, and with my agency we've helped dozens and dozens of companies sign more clients by deploying the best go-to-market engineering strategies for them. And alongside that, I've also trained over 1,000 students online. Alright, let's take a look together at what deliverability really is. Why is it essential? What is the playbook to follow after 2025? What are the mistakes that can completely destroy your deliverability? And finally, what are the tools to measure and improve it? Alright, let's start with the basics. So what exactly is deliverability? It's the ratio between the number of emails that reach their destination and the number of emails you sent out from your inbox. So, contrary to what some people think, it's not just about emails being delivered or going to spam. In fact, between the two, on a global scale, and this concerns all types of emails, 17% of emails end up nowhere. That means they're not delivered, they don't even end up in the spam folder. You can't even go and retrieve them from spam. And yes, 17% of emails basically just disappear into thin air. So just that number alone should tip you off about the issue of deliverability and show you how tricky this topic really is. And obviously it will determine the rest of our results, because if our prospecting messages aren't even delivered and just disappear into thin air or end up in spam, we're not going to achieve the results we're hoping for at all. And so, aside from actual deliverability, there's also the question of deliverability into which category, because any emails that end up in tabs like Other or Promotions are definitely not what we're aiming for. What we want, of course, is for our cold email to reach our recipient and have the highest possible chance of being read. To do that, you need to land in the primary tab of their inbox, so you can see just how crucial deliverability is for our entire cold emailing strategy and why we talk about this concept so much. The problem is, it's a bit of a black box. There are no clear written rules that tell us which criteria to follow or which best practices to implement to achieve the best possible deliverability. ESPs or email service providers have anti-spam rules, but of course they keep them private and don't disclose them, since their goal is precisely to protect their users from spam and all unsolicited emails. So what we do as marketers in cold outreach is to somewhat reverse engineer these rules based on our observations. It's empirical and things change very quickly. There are always new rules being put in place, and we have to gradually figure them out through experience. But if you're not an expert on the subject, I'm going to give you the main guidelines and key rules to follow to perform as well as possible in these areas. One concept you absolutely need to understand when it comes to deliverability is that very quickly, at the scale of a domain you use to send emails, you can end up in either a virtuous circle or a vicious circle. And that's exactly why a cumulative effect is created in this way. And that's why sometimes it comes down to very little, just a few percentage points on a particular metric or result. And it's this small difference that, little by little, will lead us into the virtuous circle of a good domain reputation, or the opposite. In terms of best practices, I recommend that you follow the 11 recommendations from this checklist that's displayed on the screen. Let's say this is really the foundation for achieving good deliverability after 2025. But first, let's focus on this checklist. So there's the warm-up. The warm-up obviously is extremely important. When you decide to get into cold emailing, you'll create dedicated domains and set up inboxes on those domains, so email accounts specifically for cold emailing, to avoid mixing your main website's domain with your cold email activities. This is especially important to prevent the risk of damaging your main domain's reputation due to your prospecting activities, which could be really problematic. So generally that's what we do. And so we need to have a warm-up phase both for the domain itself, which is new, and that sends a negative signal to spam filters, and also to warm up, to pre-warm the email addresses to make it look as if they're actually being used by real humans. The general logic in terms of deliverability, which is important to understand, is that what we're trying to do is get as far away as possible from all the practices that a spammer would use. So if you think about what a spammer does when they want to flood certain targets with emails, it's that they buy a domain, use it immediately and very quickly, so it will be new, and they won't follow a whole set of rules. They'll also send signals in terms of volume to email service providers that show it's not humanly possible. So what we want to do is stay under those radars and do the opposite. 3 recommendations. The first is to use a dedicated tool, and I'll show you one in just a moment. And so these tools actually have a pool of real users and automate the messages that go back and forth from one user to another within their user network. The second thing is that in terms of targets, it's very simple. You can aim for a final goal of 30 warm-up emails per day. I'm not talking about real emails, but about warm-up emails. And by the way, at the time I'm making this video, you can follow the 30-30 rule. Eventually, once you've completed this warm-up phase, you should settle into a steady pace of 30 real emails per inbox and 30 warm-up emails, and schedule a ramp-up of 2 per day. So that means an increment of 2, 0, 2, 4, 6, and so on, up to 30. And finally, in terms of the ramp-up phase for the warm-up, I recommend 3 weeks. Yes, you might think you'll have to wait 3 weeks and feel impatient, but honestly, it's a phase that you can actually shorten a little. In fact, in 2 weeks, generally, you can start sending. But I don't recommend it because to be safe and to avoid problems later that could make you lose even more time, I advise you to take at least 3 weeks. Here you see for my sender score, I'm at 99 out of 100, so that's a very good score. And you can see that in fact the warm-up is still active. That's also a mistake you shouldn't make. Deactivating the warm-up once you start your real campaigns. You absolutely must not do that. On the contrary, you need to keep it active because you continue to have these automations that send real emails between real users, and some emails that from time to time end up in spam are, so to speak, rescued and recovered. You'll see that if you suddenly stop your warm-up while you already have campaigns running, there's a high chance that within a few weeks or even just a few days, your deliverability will drop sharply. So that you need to keep it going. And you see here, this is a domain that had deliverability issues, which we more or less recovered little by little without actually doing a lot, except for keeping Lemwarm active long enough for us to get off certain spam blacklists and be identified again as a legitimate sender. And you can see that lately everything is in the green and it's absolutely perfect. So that was on Lemwarm. Another tool you can use, which is independent from outreach sequencing tools, is Warm-Up Inbox. And here it's basically the same principle. You can connect as many mailboxes as you want and then you'll get metrics on deliverability. And here it's deactivated, but you can reactivate a warm-up and a gradual ramp-up that allows you to see what's happening. 2 rules for deliverability come into play at the copywriting level. The first is 0 tolerance when it comes to spam words. And to check this, I recommend this little free online tool provided by Mailmetia, which is spam checker. Basically, you just copy and paste your copy into it, and it will identify words that should be avoided. These absolutely need to be removed after 2025 to maintain good deliverability for your campaign. The second thing in your copywriting is the presence of a short sentence telling the recipient how to unsubscribe from your list. On the one hand, it's a legal requirement, and on the other hand, it's a very good practice to prevent people from getting annoyed or upset. In fact, it gives them an exit. And on top of that, it allows you to get more responses, even if it's just a word or a very short sentence. People reply to you, letting you know they no longer want to receive updates, and then it's up to you to manually unsubscribe them. And I say manually, unless you've automated it with AI, but that's another topic. Next, regarding targeting. If you want to achieve optimal deliverability, you really have to aim for the maximum. And I would say you need to have 99% of your contacts actually within your target audience. Why? Because the more people you have outside your target, the greater the risk of annoying those contacts, and those people might click the spam button. And that, the manual human click on "this message is spam," is the worst thing that can happen to you. It's the strongest signal for spam filters, indicating that obviously your address or even your domain should be categorized as spam since it's a human saying so. It's not about rules, it's the person, the actual user. After that, it's all a matter of statistics. You see, if you have 1, maybe 2 people out of hundreds of emails who click on spam, it still won't be a signal that indicates with absolute certainty that it's really spam. But if you start to have a proportion that becomes significant, and here there's the rule of 0.3%, you have to stay below 0.3% of spam reports to be good in terms of deliverability. So the connection with targeting is simply that the more people you have who are outside your target audience, the more people will wonder, why are they contacting me? It's completely off the mark. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's blasting messages to everyone, to anyone. It annoys me. I click on spam. Then there are quite a few technical settings, you know. So after 2025, I strongly advise you to stop tracking opens and clicks. We've been tracking opens and clicks for a long time because we're marketers, so we prefer to have metrics. In some cases, or when you're just starting out, I want to tell you go ahead and do it. Track your opens because, in particular, the open rate lets you see whether the subject line of your email is good or not, because it's mainly the subject line of the email that sparks interest or curiosity, and that's what gets your email opened. Now, as we know, with the iOS updates and others, this indicator is no longer accurate. In fact, it's actually overestimated. So when you see a 60% open rate, in reality, it's less than that. But it doesn't really matter. The goal is to compare different campaigns or different email subject lines that you can A/B test on most sequencing software to see what works and what doesn't. Again, it's useful to have this data, but what happens is that when you actually track opens or clicks, you insert a tracking link into your recipient's inbox, and they'll get this little box they have to click on to display images, which actually isn't an image but a pixel, so it immediately comes across as less legitimate. There's also a sense of doubt that can arise in your recipient's mind because of this. Overall, if you know which email subject lines are effective, you can disable open tracking, and that will improve deliverability, SPF, DKIM, DMARC. Those are the main standards. There's also the custom tracking domain. So all of this, I recommend that you set it up once and for all for each domain. You need to configure it, check it, and it's absolutely essential. Next, you also have the choice of which domain you'll use for your inboxes. And this choice of domain is not insignificant. In reality, what we've observed is that national domains provide better deliverability scores than the classic domains like .com, and those in turn perform better than atypical domains such as .ai, .club, and so on. So anything that's an atypical or exotic domain, you can set those aside. .com is perfectly fine. We know that there are fewer and fewer .com domains available. Sometimes it can be a bit difficult to find the domain you want with a .com extension. And if you have the opportunity because you're prospecting in a specific geographic area, then I recommend also looking at country extensions like .fr if your market is France. And especially because for a .fr domain, logically and legally, to obtain it, you have to prove that you are a natural person or a legal entity based in France. And on top of that, the HOIS file, which is a file visible online that you can set to private or public, cannot be set to private when you purchase a .fr domain. So overall, .fr domains have a better reputation because there are very few spammers who go for this type of extension since they can't hide, they can't be private. So that's why national domains are interesting. As for the signature, it needs to be light. Personally, I recommend 3 lines. These 3 lines would be something like your name, possibly your position, the address, and the company name, or instead of the address, your email. And that's it. Basically, you keep it to 3 lines, no photo, no links. That's what helps achieve better deliverability. As is often the case, there are trade-offs to make, and sometimes in certain contexts, you might notice that adding a photo or a banner linking to LinkedIn or something else can, on the contrary, help build more trust in a cold email. But you should know that this will reduce deliverability, so it's up to you to decide what is preferable. And finally, something we systematically use in all our copies is spin tags. And when I talk about spin tags, it can also be an icebreaker or any phrase personalized by AI. These anti-spam filters have become stronger, especially in 2024 and 2025 in several ways. There's the volume aspect for starters, meaning that volumes that are hardly achievable by humans have been increasingly detected and flagged as spam. There's also the fact of sending emails that look alike or even that are exactly the same. You have to understand that a human prospector will also do copy pasting. So it's normal for there to be some emails with parts with blocks of text that are the same. Even with natural and legitimate use, you'll find this kind of behavior. Now, if you copy paste an email, send out a huge volume, like hundreds of emails per day per inbox, and you never change your campaign, and you've had a campaign running like that for months, then you can be absolutely sure that you've been flagged for a long time. And you can be absolutely sure that the reason your campaign isn't getting results anymore is because you've been flagged. Basically, the more diversity you put into your copywriting, the better it is for deliverability. A pretty healthy and scalable way to do this is spin tags. If you don't know what spin tags is, you can check in the software you're using. Usually it's in the variables section, and they offer a little module to add spin tags. Otherwise, you can look in your software's documentation and search for the syntax to use for spin tags. In fact, it's a syntax that allows you to add randomness. You'll be able to add 3 or 4 versions of a sentence, a part of a sentence, or even a word, which will be generated randomly. By mixing all of this, it allows you to have emails that don't look too similar. So if you use syntax or AI because it has the same effect, it's even better with AI since you can have a sentence that's completely personalized for each contact, which is optimal. If you do this and you keep the volume relatively low for each inbox, then you won't get detected. And in addition, we can add one last recommendation to this, which is to change your campaigns from time to time and generally update your copywriting and the hooks you use, because if you never change your campaign, after several months, the anti-spam filters will detect these patterns, and it's these patterns that will get you blocked. Now, I'm going to introduce you to a number of tools that allow you to evaluate and then improve your deliverability. The first one we can look at together is a classic. It's a tool that's largely free. Well, after a certain number of tests, it will block your IP and ask you to switch to a paid plan. But to run a few quick tests, you can stay completely on the free mode. So it's mail tester with a hyphen. You just go to the URL, you land on this page, and there it gives you an email address to which you will send your test email. So when you send your test email, you absolutely have to do it using the entire infrastructure you use in real conditions and with the copywriting inside, because as we've seen, the copywriting can include spam words. So if I do it, for example, from lemlist, you can see that I actually created a test sequence specifically for this, where I put only one recipient, which is the email address I copied and pasted here. I made sure that in terms of scheduling, the email could be sent out quickly, so I wouldn't have to wait too long. So now normally, if I click here, the email has been received, and then I'll get my score. So here, as you can see, there's no problem. I have a great score of 10 out of 10, but when you do have issues, everything is detailed and it gives you instructions on how to fix those problems. So here, for example, I have a small issue. What does it say? It tells me that my message doesn't contain an unsubscribe link or an unsubscribe header, but that doesn't affect my 10 out of 10 score. The downside of Mail Tester is that it's a bit too optimistic. That is, just because I have 10 out of 10 doesn't mean my deliverability is perfect, not at all. So actually you can very well have scores of 8, 9, or even 10 out of 10 and still have major deliverability issues. What Mail Tester gives you is more like, it actually checks a whole checklist, especially technical aspects, and it verifies if everything is okay. But it won't be able to take into account certain more subtle aspects and some reputation factors. So this is just a first check to do. Then if you want to do in-depth deliverability tests, and if you want to get a real idea of your deliverability, and as I was saying, both what actually lands in the main inbox, what goes to spam, and what ends up nowhere, meaning what isn't delivered at all. And if you want to run a test across different services to know how you land at Google, how you land at Microsoft, how you land at Yahoo, etc., well, GlowCap is a great tool that allows you to do that. So actually you're going to be connected. Here, instead of having just one email address, you'll have a list of about 40 email addresses that you can use in a test campaign. You add an ID that will allow it to track this. And by launching the test, you'll get all the details. And this will really give you a precise view of the actual deliverability. Once again, it's not a perfect test because the sample provided by GlowCap doesn't proportionally match your actual recipients or your recipient base, but nevertheless, there is still some diversity and it allows you to run this test in a pretty interesting way. Personally, what I use more and more nowadays are all these verification and audit tools that are integrated into the outreach tools we already use because it's convenient. You don't need to leave the tool and you're always on the same interface. And so, for example, on the list that I use a lot, in the sending settings, I can actually see all the users who are connected to a nameless team. And so I can see if their performance starts to drop, or if there are some, like here, who are in a problematic zone. I can launch setup audits, for example, to check technical aspects. If I see one that's not good, I might relaunch a technical setup to check if I forgot to configure an SPF, DKIM, etc. I also have the warm-up section directly available, so it's more a matter of speed. I don't need to go into the warm settings. I can redefine what I need and potentially relaunch a warm-up directly from here. And finally, all the tools that actually provide you with pre-configured inboxes generally also have deliverability monitoring. You can see here there are spam checks inside Mailpool, and these were checks carried out at the very beginning of these inboxes' existence when they were just a few days old. The idea, which I personally don't use but I find it pretty well done, is to run these spam checks right at the start when you create the email and it's still very new. You can also see the tests where there might be blacklists or spam blacklists. You see all the criteria, you see technical parameters. For example, as I did back then, it indicated to me that a major negative point was precisely the age of this domain, which was too recent. So actually it recommends waiting before really using it. And there you have it, a number of things like that. What the filters really don't like either is when there are broken links. So it points that out to you and so on and so forth. In fact, you can redo this test at intervals of 1 week, 2 weeks, or 3 weeks when you're in the warm-up phase, especially to see if things are progressing. And logically, it improves over time and your score becomes higher in the end. And I'll move right on to Mailpool and the main feature of a tool like this, which is simply to provide you with inboxes and therefore email addresses, email boxes that allow you to do cold emailing specifically, because a tool like Mailpool is really dedicated to that. The advantage is that all these technical setup issues are handled by this company, by this service provider. Of course, there are better and worse service providers. Personally, I think that Mailpool is one of the good ones today. There's also Maildozo and Outreach today, which I may have already mentioned, and they all basically work on the same principle. So, as you can see with Mailpool, you simply have a dashboard and I can create new domains here. So, as an agency, we use it a lot because every time we onboard a new client, we have to do all the setup, which can be quite time consuming. So here, I actually buy several domains per client when I onboard them. Once I've bought my domain, which really just takes a few clicks and a few seconds, I go and add inboxes. And you can see here, it's super simple. I can add as many inboxes as I want for Google, for Microsoft. They also have their own SMTP, Mailpool, which I haven't used yet, so I don't know how good it is. So if I need more, I just add licenses under a single billing. And then, for example, I go into Google inboxes and I can create inboxes in my clients' names in just a few seconds or minutes. It's really just about entering the information. At that point, I can put whatever I want in terms of email. I'll select one of the domains I own to do this. I can do this. In fact, I'll create several with different syntaxes, and there you go. In just a few seconds, once it's created, my inboxes show up here. It's really fast whenever I need them. In the settings, if you want, I'll have the password and even the code for two-factor authentication if I need to connect it, for example, to Lemlist. I'll simply use the login and password. If I want to connect directly to the Google interface to really log in, well, it's just a regular account, you know. It's a normal account, meaning I can log into it and I'll be on the Google interface using the information here. The other advantage, I think, at least for us as agents, once again, it's super convenient, is that we don't need to provide a phone number or use a more complicated system for two-factor authentication. Everything is already integrated. I just have to copy and paste this whenever I need it. I log into the Mailpool dashboard and that's it. You can even test it with the spam check, but SPF, DKIM, DMARC, custom tracking domain, everything is already set up. So there you go, DKIM, DMARC. I didn't have to do anything, and within a few seconds I had an inbox that was good to go in that regard. So above all, it's a huge time saver, and it also gives you the certainty that these technical settings are properly configured. There you go, we've covered a number of points together to help you better manage your deliverability. I know it can seem intimidating because there are so many aspects and things can feel a bit all over the place, but I want to reassure you, even though we've looked at things a bit negatively by focusing on all the risks, if you actually follow best practices and do things rigorously, there's no problem. Your deliverability should be fine, even quite good already, and it should allow you to get the job done, I would say. Now, if you want to take it a step further, you'll need to look at the most advanced practices I've discussed with you, explore certain subtleties, and above all, understand what works at the time I'm making this video and when you launch your campaigns, because this is a constantly evolving world. There are rules that change, there are anti-spam filters that change, and that's why you always need to keep yourself up to date on these aspects, or of course, if it's not your job, you can delegate it to an agency like ours at Sendo. But if you want to have that level of knowledge, well, I recommend you keep looking into the best practices, and in particular, you can check out services like outreach tools such as Lemlist or Instant Lead. But even better, you can get information by following content also created by tools like Mailpool, Maildozo, and so on. Because they are truly experts when it comes to deliverability, since that's really their core business. Or, of course, you can subscribe to my channel because I'll keep making this kind of video. And whenever there are major changes, I'll obviously provide updates. In the end, deliverability is about taking a checklist and ticking every box. You must ensure that unchanging technical settings are in order and verify that all campaigns, including those launched by your colleagues, follow established best practices. So in the end, deliverability is kind of straightforward and no nonsense. And that's why, since there are so many things to check to make your life easier, I've created a checklist This checklist includes even more items than the infographic we looked at because the infographic only covers the main points. But in the checklist that I suggest you download using the link in the description, there are even more elements. And there you go. This really allows you to cover everything that's important for deliverability. And if you do this, there's really no reason why your deliverability shouldn't be optimal. So there you have it. There's a little link in the description. If you find it useful, you can go ahead and download it right away. So to conclude, if your deliverability is currently blocking the results of your email campaigns and you're in a company that has the means to delegate, don't hesitate to contact us. And now, just a quick plug. I'm actually the co-founder of an agency called Sendo, which specializes in outreach calls in particular. So there's a link in the description. It allows you to schedule a 30-minute call with us to discuss it. There's no obligation whatsoever. You have this option if it's something that might interest you. And more generally, if you want to keep getting explanations and concrete strategies on everything related to B2B lead generation, call outreach, the role of AI in all of this, and go-to-market engineering, I'm going to create even more content soon, videos on even more practical aspects and techniques you can implement. So that's coming soon. Feel free to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It really supports the work I'm doing here, of course. And maybe I'll see you in another video. See you next time.